I survived the Midnight Mall's 7 Deadly Rules. Part 1. Midnight Invitation. The first time I heard about the Midnight Mall was through a crumpled flyer shoved under my apartment door. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly smudged as if printed decades ago. In large, bold letters, it read, "The grand reopening of Hollow Pines Mall. Doors open at midnight. One night only." At the bottom, almost an afterthought, a shaky line of text whispered, "Follow the rules, and you may leave unchanged." Midnight struck like a gunshot in my tiny apartment. The wind outside howled through broken alleyways, rattling loose shutters like skeletal fingers drumming a death march. Against my better judgment, curiosity clawed its way up my spine. Throwing on my jacket, I tucked the flyer into my pocket and stepped into the night. The city was dead. Not just empty, dead. Streetlights flickered like dying stars, and my footsteps echoed too loudly down the deserted sidewalks. The air smelled of wet concrete and old smoke. When I reached Hollow Pines Mall, I expected security guards, or at least a janitor, sweeping the curb. Instead, the front doors, enormous glass panels streaked with grime, swung open with a low, aching groan. No one was there. No welcoming committee. No other cars in the parking lot, save for an ancient rusted pickup sagging on 4 flat tires. Something heavy thudded deep inside the mall, like a giant heartbeat. I hesitated. The inside was wrong. The fluorescent lights buzzed weakly overhead, casting long, jittering shadows across the cracked tile floors. Plastic plants drooped in planters filled with dust. Old pop music, the kind you'd hear in malls back in the 80s, warbled faintly through overhead speakers, slightly off-key, as if the speakers themselves were rotting. A figure stood just inside the entrance. Not a security guard, but a man in a moth-eaten suit, skin so pale it nearly glowed. His mouth curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Without a word, he handed me a laminated card. It was cold, colder than it should have been, and my breath frosted over it as I read. The 7 Rules of Hollow Pines Midnight Mall. 1. Enter through the main gate only. Side entrances are forbidden after midnight. 2. Never accept free samples, no matter who offers them. 3. If you hear the carousel start, find a store and hide. 4. Never make eye contact with the mannequins. 5. If you see a store selling clocks, walk backwards past it without speaking. 6. Beware the janitor in the yellow vest. He is not what he seems. 7. Leave before the clock strikes 3 a.m. or become part of the mall. When I looked up to question the man, he was gone. Gone like he'd never been there at all. Part 2. The Whispers from the Carousel. The music oozed from the mall's gut, a warped, tinkling melody that should have sounded cheerful, but instead crawled under my skin like 1,000 ants. Each note vibrated in the stale air, rattling the dusty potted plants and making the fluorescent lights overhead flicker wildly. Rule 3 flashed in my mind like a warning siren. If you hear the carousel start, find a store and hide. My heart rammed against my ribs. I spun on my heel, scanning the long, empty corridor for an open store. Most of the shops were sealed behind rusted security gates, their displays frozen in time, mannequins dressed in outdated fashion, sale posters from decades ago, and dusty shelves. The carousel music grew louder, closer. The floor trembled under my sneakers with each mechanical lurch of the ride. The clatter of hooves, fake horses, echoed in the distance, a mockery of life. And then came the whispers. They slithered between the music notes, breathy and insistent. Join us, ride with us, stay forever. A shiver sliced down my spine. Finally, halfway down the corridor, I spotted a store with its gate half raised. Whitmore's Books and Curiosities. The old neon sign blinked pathetically above the entrance. I bolted. My shoes squeaked against the tile, the sound deafening in the emptiness. As I sprinted, the mall itself seemed to stretch, the hallway growing longer. The carousel music warping into a slow, menacing drawl. Don't look back. Don't look back. Just as the first carousel horse, a monstrous, grinning beast with blood-red eyes, came clattering into view at the end of the hall, I dove under the half-open gate. Inside, the air smelled of rotting paper and mildew. Rows of towering bookshelves cast sharp, twitching shadows under the dim emergency lights. The whispering voices gathered at the store entrance, cooing sweetly like dying birds. The carousel spun into view outside, but it wasn't made of fiberglass ponies anymore. No, the figures mounted on the poles were people, or what used to be people. Their mouths were stretched into eternal screams, their eyes hollow and glassy. Their bodies jerked and twisted as the ride dragged them endlessly in a cruel, slow circle. And riding atop a blackened horse, leading the grotesque parade, was a thing dressed like a carnival barker, but its face was an empty porcelain mask, cracking down the center. It tilted its head toward the bookstore, sniffing, searching. I pressed myself against the floor, hidden behind a shelf of forgotten novels. The thing dismounted, its heavy boots slamming onto the tile. Step by step, it moved closer to the gate, dragging a broken megaphone by its cord, the plastic scraping horribly against the ground. From the corner of my eye, I saw it pause outside the store. It let out a dry creaking sound, almost like laughter. I held my breath. The music slowed, garbled, and then finally sputtered to silence. The barker turned its cracked face back toward the carousel, and with a mechanical twitch, climbed back onto its black horse. The ride lurched into motion again, fading into the far shadows. When I was sure it was gone, I dared to breathe. But just as I began crawling toward the entrance, something cold brushed my ankle. I jerked around and saw a hand. Not attached to any body, just a severed hand, crawling on its own like a wounded spider, its nails clicking faintly against the floor. It grabbed my leg with desperate strength. And from somewhere deep in the mall's darkness, I heard the announcement crackle through the ancient speakers. Attention shoppers! The Midnight Mall thanks you for your patronage. Please follow all posted rules to ensure a safe and enjoyable experience. We are not responsible for lost souls. Part 3. A taste you can't escape. The bookstore felt like a tomb. The musty air clawed at my throat as I yanked my ankle free from the crawling hand. It twitched once on the floor, almost sadly, before curling into a fist and going still. I didn't wait. Pushing past the sagging shelves, I darted out of Whitmore's and back into the open mall corridor. The carousel was gone. The hallway stretched empty and endless ahead. Somewhere above, a ceiling fan spun lazily, its broken blades screeching with every turn. The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps. I needed to find an exit, but just as I started moving, I smelled it. Warm, buttery, sweet. Like fresh-baked cookies, melting chocolate, and hot caramel all at once. It hit me so hard my knees buckled. Hunger gnawed at my stomach like a living thing. I realized, with creeping dread, that the mall wasn't trying to scare me anymore. It was trying to lure me. A booth had appeared near the food court, one that hadn't been there minutes ago. A bright red canopy fluttered above it, reading in bold, cheerful letters, "Free samples, midnight special." Behind the counter stood 3 figures. They were dressed like old-fashioned soda jerks. White paper hats, crisp uniforms, but their skin was wrong. It sagged in places, translucent and waxy, and their smiles were frozen unnaturally wide. The corners of their mouths cracked and bleeding. One of them, a woman with frizzy blonde curls, held out a tiny paper cup toward me, sloshing with thick, dark red liquid. Her voice sang out in a mechanical jingle. "Just one sip, that's all it takes." I stumbled backward, the rules screaming in my mind. Never accept free samples after midnight. Second server, a gangly man with stitched lips, grabbed a tray of steaming mini hot dogs and lurched forward, thrusting it under my nose. The smell was unbearable. It hijacked my brain, making my mouth flood with saliva. I clamped my jaw shut so hard, my teeth ached. "No thanks," I croaked. The trio's faces twitched. Their frozen smiles cracked wider, splitting the corners of their cheeks into red, oozing fissures. The lights overhead flickered violently. A third server, smaller and wearing a crooked kiss the cook apron, began slamming a bell on the counter. Ding, 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 ding. The sound stabbed into my skull, sharp and disorienting. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard the clatter of trays hitting the floor, the slap of wet footsteps on tile. They were chasing me. Everywhere I looked, booths were materializing out of thin air. Try our midnight milkshakes. Taste the eternal candy. Sample the secrets of the mall. Each one more grotesque than the last. Gaping-mouthed mannequins pouring ladles of thick, writhing sludge into paper cups. Monstrous children waving giant lollipops that bled from their candy shells. I darted past a claw machine filled with twitching hands, past a popcorn cart manned by a headless clown. The servers behind me howled, an awful, high-pitched shriek like teeth scraping glass. The mall twisted around me again, corridors looping, escalators leading to nowhere, shop fronts bending like melted wax. I spotted an old toy store up ahead, its sign dangling by one hinge, Toy Box Treasures. Without thinking, I dove inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the chasing servers skidded to a halt outside, staring at me with hollow, leaking eyes. They pressed their faces to the glass, their mouths mouthing something I couldn't hear. The toy store lights buzzed faintly. All around me, stuffed animals and broken dolls watched silently from shattered shelves. Their button eyes gleamed with malice. I collapsed behind a toppled display of teddy bears, gasping for breath, my heartbeat louder than the mall's buzz. From somewhere deep inside the store, I heard something laugh. Not the servers, something else. And then, over the broken intercom system, a new announcement crackled to life. Attention shoppers, midnight sales are final. No refunds, no returns, no escape. The lights flickered once, and then the toys began to move. Part 4. The Talking Toys. The bear closest to me twitched. At first, I thought it was a trick of the flickering light. But then its stubby arms jerked up in a spasmodic, unnatural motion, and its glossy button eyes swiveled toward me. It saw me. The others began to move too, an army of stitched smiles and torn seams. A rubber ducky flopped across the floor, its beak snapping open and shut with a rhythmic clack. A porcelain doll with a cracked face skittered across the tiles on spider-like limbs, her painted-on eyes weeping black tears. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, heart hammering against my ribs. The intercom buzzed again. Friendly reminder, talking to toys after midnight is strictly prohibited. Violators will be recycled. One of the teddy bears stumbled closer, dragging a foot behind it. Its stitched mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. It tilted its head to one side, curious, almost human. And then, in a voice like splintering wood, it spoke. "Are you Lowell?" I bit down on my lips so hard I tasted blood. The rule screamed in my mind, "Do not speak." The bear took another shambling step toward me. It clutched something in its paw, a battered mall directory smeared with something dark and sticky. "I can help you find the exit," it rasped, voice saccharine sweet and hollow. Behind it, more toys gathered. A slumped rag doll dragging a knife, a jack-in-the-box spinning wildly on its own, its clown popping up and down in mechanical spasms. Their eyes gleamed hungrily. The bear dropped the blood-stained map at my feet. "All you have to do," it crooned, "is say please." My throat burned. Instinct screamed to run, but I knew better. If I spoke, I was dead. The bear waited, twitching. The doll behind it began to giggle, a dry, broken sound like leaves scraping on concrete. When I didn't answer, the bear's smile snapped into a snarl. It bent low, its button nose inches from my face. "Say it." Behind me, a stuffed bunny with slashed ears began to scream, a high-pitched, bone-shattering wail. The air grew thick and syrupy. Every nerve in my body screamed to move. I bolted, dodging the bear's flailing arms, sprinting deeper into the toy store. The dolls chased after me, their tiny feet pattering like rain on the tile. Thud, thud, thud. Shelves toppled. A tricycle rolled itself across my path, trying to trip me. I jumped over it, nearly twisting my ankle. Somewhere behind, I heard the bear roar in frustration, a sound that didn't belong to anything stuffed or stitched. More toys spilled into the aisles, their smiles growing sharper, their laughter rising in a discordant, maddening chorus. I spotted a cracked exit sign near the back of the store. It flickered weakly above a set of double doors, chained shut with rusted links. Hanging from the chain was a sign, "Speak the secret word to unlock." My blood ran cold. I stumbled toward it, the toys closing in from all sides. Their eyes burned into me. Their voices chanted, "Say it, say it, say it." I shook my head violently. If I said anything, I'd be theirs. I did the only thing I could think of. I turned and kicked the door as hard as I could. The chain rattled. The hinges groaned. The toys shrieked, enraged. I kicked again and again until the wood splintered and the door buckled. With one final desperate shove, I burst through into the mall corridor beyond. The doors slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. The chanting stopped. Silence. I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, my ears ringing. Then, I heard the intercom buzz to life once more. Congratulations, shopper. You have survived the midnight toys section. Please proceed to the next department, if you dare. The lights ahead flickered. A massive escalator stood before me, leading upward into darkness. At the base of it, a new sign waited. Rule number 5. Never ride the escalators up, only down. My stomach twisted. I was nowhere near out of danger. In fact, I was only getting deeper into the nightmare. Part 5. The Forbidden Ascent. The escalator groaned before me, its rubber steps grinding endlessly upward into darkness. Each step disappeared into a yawning black void, as if the mall itself was swallowing them whole. The rule repeated in my mind like a warning siren. Never ride the escalators up, only down. I scanned the area desperately. Beside the escalator, barely visible in the flickering fluorescent light, was a narrow maintenance stairwell. The door was ajar, swinging slightly in a breeze that smelled of rust and mildew. There was no rule posted for the stairwell, but somehow that made it feel even more dangerous. Behind me, the toy store doors rattled violently. I didn't want to find out what would happen if those things broke through. I ran to the stairwell. The moment I touched the door, the lights above me sputtered and died. The mall plunged into a darkness so thick it felt alive. Somewhere deep in the stairwell, I heard footsteps. Not regular footsteps. Heavy, dragging, wet. My instinct screamed to turn back. But the escalator was off limits. The toys were coming. The only choice was forward. I slipped inside and pulled the door closed behind me with a soft click. Immediately, the temperature dropped. My breath steamed in the freezing air. Every step I took echoed like a gunshot in the silent stairwell. Halfway up the first flight, I heard a voice whisper my name, not loudly, not angrily, just a soft, broken murmur, like a dying breath. Please help me. I froze. There was something wrong with the voice. It sounded exactly like me, mimicking me, imitating the exact tone I would use if I were scared and begging for my life. The footsteps started again, closer this time, dragging, wet, squelch, scuff, squelch. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding in my ears. Out of the darkness above, something slithered into vision. Or what used to be a hand, now it was little more than a dripping mess of bone and blackened flesh, grasping blindly down the railing toward me. The creature followed, a distorted, shambling parody of myself. It wore my face, stretched grotesquely over something inhuman. Its lips moved without sound, gaping in a sick attempt to form words. Come back. I bolted up the stairs 2 steps at a time, my shoes slipping on the slick, blood-smeared steps. The thing howled behind me, a screech like tearing metal and breaking bones. The stairwell twisted and turned in impossible angles. Stairs doubled back on themselves, Doorways led to nowhere. Gravity itself seemed to tilt and buckle. The mall wasn't following normal rules anymore. The mall had its own rules, and I was deep inside them now. I turned a corner and saw a door at the top of the next landing, glowing faintly under a cracked red emergency light. Above the door, scrawled in dripping black paint, were the words, "Safety through obedience." The stairwell behind me groaned. The mimic was close. Too close. Without thinking, I threw myself at the door, shoulder slamming into it. It gave way, and I tumbled through into a food court. But not like any food court I'd ever seen. The place was pristine, untouched by dust or decay. Bright neon signs advertised steaming plates of food. The air smelled delicious. Buttery popcorn, sizzling burgers, fresh-baked cinnamon rolls. People sat at tables, laughing, chatting, sipping sodas. Except their faces were wrong. Their smiles were too wide. Their eyes never blinked. And every single one of them turned. As I stumbled forward, dizzy and disoriented, a waitress glided toward me. She wore a spotless uniform, her hair perfectly coiffed. In her hands was a tray. On it was a single item, a steaming hot dog, the meat glistening an unnatural shade of red. She stopped before me and smiled, a stretched, lipless grin that showed far too many teeth. "Hungry?" she whispered. All around me, the diners rose from their seats, trays in hand, offering plates of food. I realized with a sinking horror that their plates weren't filled with burgers or fries. They were filled with things that twitched, squirmed, still breathed, and all of it was being held out toward me, waiting, expecting, demanding. Part 6. The Feast of Faces. The food court pulsed with an unseen heartbeat. Each beat made the lights flicker, made the diners' faces twitch, like masks slipping on rotting skin. The waitress continued to smile, her hands thrusting the hot dog tray closer to my chest. I stared at the steaming meat. The smell turned in my stomach. It wasn't beef or pork. It was something sweeter, more coppery. The intercom buzzed again. "Please accept the meal. Hospitality is mandatory. Violators will be escorted to the kitchen." The diners around me closed in, their trays shaking in greedy anticipation. Their mouths opened wider than any human jaw should allow, revealing rows upon rows of jagged, glass-like teeth. I had seconds to decide: eat or refuse, and be dragged screaming into the unknown. My hands trembled as I reached for the hot dog. The waitress's grin widened so much the corners of her mouth nearly touched her ears. I forced myself to bite. The meat popped under my teeth. With a sickening snap, a gush of warm, salty liquid filled my mouth. It tasted like I swallowed before I could think too hard about it. Instantly, the diners cheered, a soundless eruption of clapping and nodding heads, their hands slapping together too slowly, too mechanically, like malfunctioning puppets. The waitress stepped back, curtsied, and gestured toward the far side of the food court, where an escalator led downward. The down escalator, the safe way out. My heart soared with hope. I wiped my mouth, trying not to gag, and hurried across the tiled floor. The diners returned to their tables, resuming their twisted imitation of normalcy. But as I reached the escalator, I noticed something. Every diner, every single one, wore a face I recognized. Faces of classmates I'd forgotten, neighbors from old apartments, a cashier from a gas station I stopped at once, years ago. All of them now permanent guests of this midnight mall. And if I had refused the meal, I would have joined them. I stepped onto the escalator. It rumbled to life under my feet, carrying me downward into deeper darkness. For a moment, everything was silent, just the clatter of the moving steps and the hum of unseen machinery. But then, faintly, I heard it, a voice whispering from the shadows. Not malicious, not monstrous. It sounded tired, broken. Help us. I peered into the darkness on either side of the escalator. Beyond the railings, where walls should have been, was only a vast, endless void. Floating in that void were hundreds of hands, reaching, grasping, clawing. Some hands were skeletal. Others looked fresh, glistening with blood. All of them stretched toward me, trying to pull me off the escalator and into the endless black. I clenched my fists and kept my eyes forward, focusing on the next rule etched onto the silver side panels of the escalator. Stay on the escalator. Do not step off until it stops. One of the hands brushed my ankle. I stumbled, almost falling over the moving handrail. The whispering grew louder. 1,000 broken voices weeping, begging, screaming. I bit my tongue to stay silent. The escalator plunged deeper into the gloom, and for a moment, I thought there would be no end. Then, light. A weak, shivering fluorescent glow ahead. The escalator began to slow. At the bottom was another floor of the mall. This one was wrong. The storefronts had no signs, no logos, only black, gaping entrances, like open mouths. And something else. The floor was covered in mist, swirling thick around my knees. From somewhere in that mist, I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, accompanied by a low, wet scraping sound. The escalator hissed to a halt. I had no choice but to step off. The moment I did, the mist surged around me, obscuring everything more than a few feet away. From the mist came a voice, deeper and older than any I'd heard yet. Rule number 7. If you encounter the manager, do not speak unless spoken to. And then, from the mist ahead, I saw it. A towering shadow, hunched and lurching, dragging something heavy behind it. The manager. And it was coming straight for me. Part 7. Meeting the manager. The shadow moved through the mist like a ship through thick water. Each step it took echoed with a dull, wet thud, vibrating in my chest. I could barely see more than a few feet ahead, but every instinct screamed at me. Don't run. Don't hide. Don't speak. The manager's outline became clearer. It was tall, too tall, easily scraping the cracked ceiling above. Its body was draped in something that looked like a patchwork of stitched-together shopping bags, tattered and stained. The dragging sound was a chain, a massive iron chain looped around its wrists and trailing behind it, links grinding across the tile floor. As it stepped closer, I saw its head, or what should have been a head. Instead, it wore a shattered mannequin face, hollow eye sockets, cracks spiderwebbing across glossy, fake skin, and from those cracks seeped a thick, black tar that reeked of burned plastic and old blood. I stood frozen, hands clenched into fists, heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my ribs. Then, it spoke. Its voice was wrong, layered, like a dozen broken radios, all tuned to different stations, but forced to broadcast one awful sound. Customer. The mist around us seemed to shudder at the word. I remembered rule number 7, do not speak unless spoken to. And it had spoken, directly to me. My mouth was dry. My tongue felt like sandpaper. I forced myself to answer, voice trembling. Yes, the manager tilted its head, as if studying me. For a terrifying moment, it said nothing. Just breathing, a ragged, wet rasp that smelled of mildew and rot. Then it lifted a hand. At the tip of each finger was a jagged hook, rusted and dripping something thick and dark. One hook pointed at me, another pointed to the left, into a store whose name had long since faded from its cracked glass front. A flickering neon sign buzzed weakly above the doorway, casting sickly green light. Clearance. I understood immediately. It was giving me a choice. Follow its direction or disobey and suffer. I gave a shaky nod. The manager lowered its hand. The chains rattled as it turned and melted back into the mist, its huge form swallowed whole by the swirling fog. I didn't wait. Without breathing, without thinking, I sprinted toward the clearance store. The door creaked open as I approached, as if the mall itself was exhaling a sigh of hunger. Inside was darker, colder. The shelves were lined with objects that should not exist. Dolls with human teeth grinning from torn mouths. Books bound in something that pulsed as I passed. Televisions that flickered to life with static images of people screaming in slow motion. And worst of all, I saw mirrors. Hundreds of cracked mirrors lining every wall, every corner. In each reflection, I saw myself, but slightly wrong. In one mirror, my eyes bled black tears. In another, my skin sagged like melted wax. In another, I wore the manager's shattered mannequin mask. The rules came flooding back. If you see your reflection change, do not stop moving. I swallowed my terror and pushed forward, refusing to meet any reflection's gaze. The mist seeped into the store too, carrying faint whispers. Stay, stay, stay with us. Fingers, dozens of them, pressed against the inside of the mirrors, smudging the glass as they tried to claw their way out. I almost stumbled when I saw one mirror crack violently as a hand burst through, reaching for my throat, but I kept moving. Faster. At the far end of the clearance store, there was a heavy metal door, half rusted shut. Above it, a painted sign, Exit. I threw myself against it. It didn't budge. The whispers grew louder, angrier. The reflections began to climb out of their frames, distorted versions of myself, staggering toward me with twisted smiles. I slammed my shoulder against the door again, and this time, it gave way, just a crack. A sliver of pure white light poured through. Desperately, I squeezed through the gap, feeling icy fingers brush my back. The moment I slipped through, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. Silence. I collapsed onto a cold marble floor, gasping for breath. I was somewhere new. A grand hallway stretched before me, lined with velvet ropes and golden stanchions. At the far end, a gleaming elevator stood open, its lights flickering invitingly. Overhead, a speaker crackled to life once again. Final rule: to leave the mall, You must ride the elevator alone. The hallway was empty. For now. But I heard movement behind the door I just escaped. I didn't have long. Dragging myself to my feet, I stumbled toward the elevator, heart pounding, shadows flickering at the corners of my vision. And deep down, I knew the worst was yet to come. Part 8. The Elevator Test. The marble floor seemed to hum beneath my feet as I staggered toward the open elevator. Its polished metal doors were impossibly clean, reflecting me in perfect, unsettling detail. Unlike the warped mirrors I'd escaped moments ago, a low chime rang out from within, beckoning me. Ding, I stepped inside. The elevator was small, barely big enough for 2 people. Walls lined with tarnished brass. A cracked mirror on the back wall. A button panel with no numbers, only a single black button labeled Exit. My finger hovered over it, but just as I was about to press it, the speaker crackled again overhead. Final reminder, you must ride the elevator alone. If anyone or anything enters with you, you must not acknowledge it. I froze. A thick silence wrapped around me like a noose. Slowly, I pressed the exit button. The doors shuddered, groaning on their tracks, and began to close, almost shut. Almost. Then, at the very last second, a hand shot through the gap. The doors bounced back open with a mechanical whine. Standing there was a woman, or at least, something pretending to be a woman. She wore a red dress torn at the hem, her bare feet blackened with soot. Her skin was far too pale, almost translucent under the sickly fluorescent lights. And her eyes were pure black, like endless tunnels leading nowhere. She smiled. It was wrong. Too wide, too many teeth. Without a sound, she stepped into the elevator beside me. I backed against the wall, heart slamming against my ribs. The doors slid closed behind her with a heavy clunk. We were moving. The elevator rattled and groaned as it descended or ascended. I couldn't tell anymore. The woman didn't move. She simply stood there, staring at me with that hideous, empty grin. Seconds stretched into eternities. The rules burned into my mind. Do not acknowledge her. Do not speak. Do not look too long. I squeezed my eyes shut. The elevator lurched. I heard a sound. A whisper. So close to my ear it felt like a breath against my skin. You shouldn't be here. My muscles locked. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I stayed frozen, hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. The elevator jolted again. The whisper grew louder. Let me see you. Let me see what's inside. Fingers brushed against my arm. Cold, wet, lingering too long. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. Still, I said nothing. Still, I kept my eyes squeezed shut. Suddenly, the elevator plunged. Weightlessness seized my stomach as we dropped. I almost cried out, but bit it back. The woman, the thing, giggled. A soft, childlike sound that made my skin crawl. And then, just as suddenly, the elevator slammed to a halt. Silence. The doors creaked open. Blinding white light poured in. I forced my eyes open. The woman was gone. The elevator was empty, except for me. heart hammering, knees trembling. I stepped out into the light. Before me stretched a new corridor, lined with gleaming white tiles, stretching into a horizon I couldn't see. And at the end of the corridor, a simple glass door. Above it, glowing letters, exit, final clearance. I was almost out, but somehow, deep inside, I knew. Part 9, the final clearance. The hallway stretched before me, a sickeningly clean, sterile corridor that seemed to go on forever. The air was thick with the scent of disinfectant, and the lights above flickered intermittently, casting long, erratic shadows along the walls. Every step I took echoed too loudly in the silence, as if the building itself was listening. At the far end, the glass door loomed. Exit, final clearance. I had made it. I could feel the sweet, intoxicating taste of freedom already on the tip of my tongue. The door was right there. I only had to step through it, and thud, a heavy muffled sound echoed behind me. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and then a voice. The voice I had been dreading since I first set foot in this place. "You're not supposed to leave." I turned. Standing at the far end of the corridor was the manager. His silhouette was outlined by the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights, casting a dark shadow that made his presence even more menacing. He had a slight, twisted grin on his face, but it was his eyes, those dark, empty pits that gave nothing away, that chilled me to my core. "You followed all the rules, but some things, there's no escape from." He stepped forward, and with every movement, the lights above us flickered more rapidly. A soft, mechanical hum began to fill the air, vibrating through the walls and floor, as if the building itself was alive. It felt like something was waking up. The walls seemed to warp slightly, bending, breathing, shifting in ways they shouldn't. I swallowed hard. I followed the rules. I choked on the words as they came out. The weight of them felt heavy in my mouth. The rules had been my only guide, my only chance of survival. But now it felt like they were nothing but chains, keeping me locked in a nightmare that had no end. "You think you're the first to try and leave? You think this is the first time someone's followed the rules and reached the exit?" He stepped closer. "This place isn't about escape. It's about the test, the clearance. Those who leave don't leave at all. You're part of the show now." A chill crawled down my spine. "What are you talking about?" The manager's grin widened. "You're a performer. You've always been one. The moment you walked through those doors, you signed the contract." I shook my head, backing away from him, my feet stumbling as if the ground beneath me had suddenly turned slick. "What contract?" I gasped. The manager didn't answer immediately. Instead, he raised one hand, and the lights flickered wildly, turning the hallway into a strobe of confusion. A sound, faint at first, began to pulse through the walls. A faint, distant chant. The same whisper I had heard in the first store, echoing through the mall's dark corners. "I'm going to give you a choice, just like everyone before you." My breath quickened. "A choice? Yes, you can take the final exit. You'll leave here, but..." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "You won't be who you were when you came in. You'll be something else, and you'll never truly leave. You'll just become another part of the mall. A shadow, a whisper, A customer that no one sees until it's too late. My heart pounded in my chest. The manager took another step forward, his eyes glowing darkly, like coals burning in a dead fire. Or, you can stay here. Stay with me. You'll never be alone again. The rules won't matter. You'll be part of the show, forever. I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in like stones in my gut. But then, I thought of the people who had been here before me, of the whispers, of the strange figures, the stories they must have carried in their heads when they had tried to escape, tried to find the exit. I glanced back at the glass door, glowing with that eerie light. Something inside me snapped. I don't care who I have to become. I'm leaving. Without thinking, I turned and ran. I ran for the door, my feet slamming against the cold tile floor, my heartbeat thundering in my chest. I could hear the manager behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I was almost there, just a few more steps. The door was within reach, but then the ground disappeared beneath me. I fell. The lights above flickered one last time, and the elevator doors opened, wide and inviting. But I was no longer in control. I felt myself being dragged back into the elevator, the cold air of the shaft rushing past me. I told you, there's no leaving. The doors slid shut with a sickening thud. And as the elevator descended again, I realized the real game had just begun. Part 10. The game of no return. The world around me twisted as the elevator continued to descend. Deeper, darker. The cold metallic walls were unyielding, and the faint humming of the elevator mixed with the now distant echoes of the haunting whispers from the mall above. I tried to move, to scream, but the air felt thick, stifling, and no matter how hard I pushed, I couldn't get a single breath of fresh air. I looked at the elevator's digital display. It was only now that I realized this wasn't just an elevator. It was a prison, a confining, suffocating vessel taking me to who knows where. The numbers counted down, mocking me with each passing second. I told you there's no leaving. The manager's voice echoed in my head. I slammed my fists against the elevator walls, the sound of my knuckles meeting the cold metal echoing in the confined space. But there was no way out, no escape. Suddenly, the elevator jolted to a stop, the lights flickering violently before going out completely. Total darkness. Then I heard it, a soft rhythmic sound. It was distant at first, like footsteps echoing through the corridors of the unknown. Thud, thud, thud. Then came the whispers, the voices from before. Except now they weren't distant. They were close, too close. I strained my eyes, trying to make out any shape in the pitch black, but nothing. The walls felt wrong. They shifted and pulsed around me, like the very space was breathing. Thud, thud. Something was walking towards me. No, no, please, I whispered to myself, feeling the panic clawing at my chest. I stepped back, but there was nowhere to go. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. I was standing in the middle of the mall, but everything was different. The store displays I had passed earlier were gone. The rows of lights that once shone brightly above now flickered erratically, casting long, spidery shadows. The once familiar sounds of the mall, the distant hum of air conditioning, the soft murmur of shoppers, were replaced by something darker. The air was thick with an unnatural silence, only punctuated by the eerie whispers that seemed to seep from the very walls. And I wasn't alone. Around me stood figures, shadows, just at the edge of my vision. Tall, hunched figures, their faces obscured by darkness. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold, dead. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like lead. The whispers grew louder, the figures getting closer. "You can't leave," a voice whispered right next to my ear, its breath cold and rancid. I turned, expecting to see the manager, but it wasn't him. It was a face I had never seen. Pale, lifeless skin stretched over hollow cheekbones, eyes wide with madness, and lips twisted into a horrific smile. And then came the laughter, low, guttural, and echoing in my mind like 1,000 voices in unison. "There's no leaving," the voice repeated, growing louder until it filled every inch of space. And suddenly, I understood. This was no longer about following rules, no longer about playing games. It was about becoming the game. I was trapped. I had always been trapped. This wasn't a mall anymore. It was a living nightmare, a place that took the lost, the broken, and turned them into something else, something worse, a part of the show. The figures around me closed in, their movements slow and deliberate. I could feel my breath quickening as they circled, just out of reach. I wanted to scream, but my voice had failed me long ago. The air around me grew colder, and I could feel the chill creeping into my bones. I turned to run again, but it was too late. The walls around me shifted, narrowing, trapping me in a cage of dark, shifting space. The whispers were everywhere now, filling my ears, my mind, my soul. They weren't speaking. They were ordering. They were telling me what to do, what I had to become. And I realized, too late, that the rules, they were never about surviving. They were about becoming. Psst, thank you for staying till the end. If your heart's still beating, maybe it's time to like, share, and subscribe. We'll be waiting here every week with a new nightmare just for you. Remember, in the silence, something always listens back.